Hey guys, this is Brother Scott with the Potter's House, and I want us for a few minutes to look together at a scripture that no doubt we've all looked at before, and probably all have good understanding of what is being said in this scripture. But sometimes it's good to go back and just refresh ourselves and get even more understanding, or may see something that we didn't see before in a scripture. And I want to go to Hebrews chapter 10. In verse 25, and this is what it says. It says, "Not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching." Okay, when a lot of times, mainline Christianity, when they use this scripture, they're using the scripture to get people to come to their church service or to promote their revival service. They use this for their Sunday meeting times. You should be here on Sunday because that's the day we're having service. That's the Lord's day, is what they say. I was even reading a book here that we're using in our Potter's House Bible study on Wednesday night. There's a chapter in it called "Should Christians Keep the Sabbath?" And it was written by a gentleman who is against Christians keeping the Sabbath and believe that Christians should keep Sunday as their day of worship. And he even says that early Christians kept Sunday as the Lord's day. Well, if we look at that, if we see, because you're not going to find anywhere in the New Testament where it says that they met on the Lord's day. There's no reference in the Bible of that. The Bible is full of references that talk about them meeting on the Sabbath day. And you say that, and then people are going to bring up Acts 20 and verse 7, I believe, where it says upon the first day of the week. And we've done a video addressing this. Acts 27, the first day of the week. When you look at it, it actually means it could be upon the first of the Sabbaths or one of the Sabbaths, and it's referring to counting down the Sabbaths until the day of Pentecost. And even this guy that wrote this book um, even talks about the Spirit falling in what he calls Pentecost Sunday. We have to understand too that the apostles and the first believers did not refer to Pentecost as Pentecost Sunday. But that's for another place and another time. But if we do look at the Lord's Day, we see that in Revelation where it says that John was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day. So when we take that Lord's Day and we take it back to the only scriptures that John had, we're going to see that if you go to Zechariah and you go to Joel and you go to a couple of the other prophets, and it speaks of the Lord's Day, it's talking about the coming of the Lord, the return of Yeshua, and it's talking about the wrath that he's coming back with. We have to understand that the first time that Yeshua came, he come as that lamb, he come as that son of Joseph in spirit, and the second time he comes, he's coming as the son of David. He's coming as that warrior king the second time he comes. And if you read Joel and Zechariah and some other the prophets that speak of Isaiah, I believe speaks of the day of the Lord, then you're going to see that that's not really a pleasant day for some. It's a day of destruction, of darkness, of judgment for many people. So when it speaks of the Lord's Day in the New Testament, it's not speaking of Sunday. But John says, I was in the Spirit and I saw those things that was going to take place on the Lord's Day. But don't want to talk about that today, but we're looking at Hebrews 10 and 25. First off, let's understand who this letter was written to. It was written to a Hebrew congregation, but yet the church takes it and they say, well, we're not held to the same things as the Hebrew people. We're under a different covenant than the Hebrew people, but yet they want to read the Hebrew people's mail and claim all of the blessings, but they don't want to do what God requires of his people to do. But it says not forsaking. This word forsaking means do not leave behind. Do not leave behind the assembling of ourselves together. Now, this word in the Greek for assembling ourselves, I'm probably not going to say it right, but it's episynugo, or synug, and it is a noun. Now, there are different Greek words for assembly. I take this book, A Critical Lexicon, and concordance to the English and the Greek New Testament, and it's going to give um, 4 different words that reference assembling together, and they all speak of different things. Now, this word here, assembling, the episynugo word, it is a noun, okay? It's not a verb. It's a noun. So a noun is a person, place, or thing. All right. Now, one of the words used for assembly in the Greek is ekklesia, which is translated church. But ekklesia means called out. The called out. Not church. The King James translates it as church. But the word here in verse 25 for assembling together is speaking of something specific, and we're going to get to that. But it has a, let me find my book here. It has a Hebrew equivalent, okay? And this Hebrew equivalent to this Greek word, so what I'm saying is when they translated the Septuagint, when they took the Hebrew scriptures, translated them into Greek, when they come across this Hebrew word, they would put in this Greek word that's used in Hebrews 10 and 25. And the word is kahal. Kahal. And it is a noun. Okay, and I want you to get this. This kahal is a noun, meaning a convocation. You're gathering for a convocation, an assembly. You're meeting at a specific place. Okay? That's what this means in the Hebrew, this Hebrew word call. That's what this Greek word means. It's not speaking of the act of coming together, but it's speaking of a reason or a place where you're coming together. So it is a noun, and it talks about meeting for convocations or assemblies or festivals. We're going to understand now that they understood that the writer, who I believe was the Apostle Paul, is speaking of a specific thing, not everybody coming together, not the action of coming together, but the place and time of the coming together. And if we go and we look, when we understand that he is speaking of a place and time, and that the word used is speaking of a convocation, then we have to find out what the convocations that he is speaking of. We find these convocations he's speaking of in Leviticus 23. Let's just begin at verse 1. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel. If you are a born-again believer in Yeshua, if you're filled with the Spirit, with the Ruach HaKodesh, and you're allowing that Spirit to lead you and guide you, then you're going to do the things that Yahweh says to do. So you are, Paul tells us that in Romans, that we are grafted into Israel. We are now part of Israel when you come into salvation. And Yahweh says, speak to the children of Israel. This would include you and me. Concerning the feast of Yahweh. That word feast is the appointed times or the appointments of Yahweh. He says, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations. These are holy rehearsals. These are set times. These are set apart meeting times that Israel was to come together. So what is the writer in Hebrews saying? He is saying to the people, do not leave behind these set apart, these appointments that Yahweh has set, that he has given us to proclaim as holy convocations. Do not leave those behind, as the manner of some is. Some were leaving off the holy convocations and going after other things. This is why in Galatians, he says to the Galatians, why are you, once you've come to know Yahweh, why are you desiring to return again to those weak and beggarly elements? This is what was in Hebrews. Paul, or whoever the writer is, he is admonishing these people, do not walk away from the things of Yahweh. You see, this assembling of yourselves isn't a verb, it is a noun. It is reminding the people that God has got specific times that he wants his people to come together. And the writer is reminding the hearers of this letter, do not leave those things behind as you're walking out this truth. As you're walking out your faith, don't forsake them and replace them with other things as the manner of some is. And if we understand that, because then verse 26 says, for if we sin willfully after we have received the knowledge of truth, there remains no more sacrifice for sins. So evidently, once you come into this understanding and your understanding is open up to the things that God, that pleases Yahweh, the things that he requires of his people, if you don't do them, then they are sin. And there remains no more sacrifice for those sins. So this was what the Lord had drawn my attention to today. I just had to get it out. And I had not made a video to put on this YouTube channel in a while. We have two YouTube channels now. We have this one, then we have the Potter's House of Dresden, Tennessee, which is our congregational YouTube channel. And I put a couple of things on that one. There's more teachings on this one. But I just wanted, and I had made one the other day and shared it, and then someone had contacted me and said, we're so thankful that you are back on YouTube again. So we're going to try to do some little short videos from time to time and just kind of point some things out, some things that maybe get looked over by some people. I hope this was helpful for someone, maybe gave you another way to explain it, maybe gave you a clearer understanding of what the writer in Hebrews was saying. I hope you find it useful. And pray that Yahweh blesses you in Yeshua's name. Amen.